You know that feeling. When your whole world collapses in a single sentence? Mine came with 6 words. You're fired. Pack your things. And later that night, another 6, sharper than any knife. You're a failure, just admit it. Those words came from the woman I thought would stand beside me forever. Funny thing, though. Life has a strange sense of humor, because 3 years later, I walked into her office. Not as her husband, not as a broken man, but as the new owner of her company. Crazy, right? If someone told me this would happen, I'd have laughed too. But that moment, that quiet victory, didn't come easy. It came from nights filled with doubt, humiliation, and one impossible dream I refused to let die. So, want to know how a man goes from "you're fired" to "I own your company"? Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's rewind to where everything started falling apart. Before everything crashed, my life looked pretty normal. I had a decent job, steady paycheck, a corner desk, and a boss who thought teamwork meant stealing credit politely. You know the type. I wasn't rich, but I was proud. And at home I had a wife who, at least back then, believed in me. Or maybe she just believed in the version of me that fit her perfect little picture. The man with a job title she could brag about at dinner parties. We used to sit on the balcony at night, sipping coffee, talking about dreams. Hers were big, expensive, loud. Mine, simple. Build something meaningful. Make a difference. But dreams have a funny way of clashing when love turns into comparison. I remember one night she said, "Do you ever think you'll be more than just an employee?" I laughed it off then, but that question stayed in my head, like an echo that never stopped. At work, I tried harder. Longer hours, fewer weekends. I thought maybe if I became the man she wanted, I'd finally feel enough. But instead, I just felt tired. And she started looking at me differently, like I was a slow investment losing value. It's funny how you can live in the same house and still feel miles apart. Then came the layoffs. Rumors started flying, names being whispered in meetings I wasn't invited to. I told myself I was safe. I was loyal. I worked hard. But the truth? Loyalty doesn't mean much when profit's on the line. That's when it all began. The fall I never saw coming. And when it hit harder than I ever imagined. Let me take you to that day. The day I walked into the office as an employee, and walked out as the failure. It was a Thursday. The kind of morning that feels ordinary, right before your life stops being ordinary forever. I remember staring at my reflection in the elevator mirror, straightening my tie, convincing myself today would be good. But the moment those doors opened, I could feel something in the air. Silence, avoiding eyes, whispers that stopped when I walked past. You ever walk into a room and feel that everyone knows something you don't? Yeah, that kind of silence. Then came the email. Just one line. "Please meet HR in conference room B." My heart sank. I knew, before they even said it. The meeting was short, cold, mechanical. They called it a business decision. I called it the end of everything I'd worked for. I remember picking up the box, my whole career packed in cardboard. Family photo, coffee mug, a half-dead plant I never watered enough. Each item felt heavier than it should have been. As I walked through those glass doors, something inside me cracked. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. But the real hit came later that night. I told my wife, expecting, maybe foolishly, a little comfort. Instead, she looked at me like I'd brought home a disease. "Again? You couldn't even hold this one?" She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything she could have screamed. Then came the words that burned into my brain. "You're a failure. You've always been one." Something broke in me that night. Not just pride, hope. For weeks I sat staring at my computer, job hunting, pretending to be okay. But inside, I was drowning quietly. Bills piled up. Calls went unanswered. And every time my phone rang, I prayed it was an offer. It never was. You know, people say, failure builds character. Sure. But they never tell you how much it hurts while it's building it. One night, sitting in the dark, I opened a notebook I'd forgotten about, full of old startup ideas I'd once dreamed of. I don't know why, but I started reading, and somewhere between desperation and madness, an idea hit me. Maybe I couldn't find a job, because I wasn't meant to work for someone else. Maybe I was supposed to build something of my own. It sounded crazy. I had no savings, no investors, and the one person I thought would support me, she was already gone. Packed her things one morning, left a note. I can't do this anymore. That was it. The end, or so I thought. But sometimes the end of one life is the start of another. And mine, my real story, began right there, in that empty apartment, surrounded by failure. That's when I made a decision, one that would change everything. I decided I'd stop begging for a seat at someone else's table, and start building my own. Because if I was going to fall, I'd fall forward. And that's how my rise began, one painful night at a time. So, there I was, sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at an old notebook filled with ideas I had written down years ago, most of them forgotten, some of them absurd. But in that moment, absurd felt like hope. I started small. Really small, like, don't even tell your friends because they'll think you're insane small. I borrowed my savings, which wasn't much. Basically enough for ramen and electricity for 3 months. And I rented the cheapest co-working space I could find. It smelled like old coffee and failed dreams. Honestly, I fit right in. And let me tell you, the first day of your own business is terrifying. You wake up thinking, I can do this. By noon, you're Googling how to not go bankrupt in 30 days. I faced rejection instantly. Investors didn't call back. Friends avoided me. Family suggested I get a real job. Even strangers online were brutally honest. You're wasting your time. And part of me, they were right. I had no clients, no contacts, nothing but an idea and a stubborn refusal to give up. But here's the thing about desperation. It teaches you things you'll never learn comfortably. I learned how to code better. I learned how to pitch ideas in 5 seconds or less. I learned that every no was just one step closer to a yes. I worked 16 hours a day. Some nights I forgot to eat. Some nights I cried on the floor, alone. And some nights, I laughed at the absurdity of it all, talking to my empty apartment like it was my only friend. Hey, apartment, if we make it, you get the credit too. It sounds dramatic, but those nights, they built something stronger than me. They built determination, resilience, hunger, slowly, painfully slowly. Things began to change. First one client, then a small contract, then another. Every success felt unreal, like a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. And then came the real challenge. Competitors. The companies that had laughed at me, ignored me, or simply didn't think I could survive. I watched them, learned from them, sometimes copied the smart moves, and sometimes innovated my own way. There were mistakes, plenty of them. I lost money. I lost sleep. I lost confidence a few times. I burned bridges, accidentally, some on purpose. But every mistake brought me closer to understanding one thing. Success doesn't come to you. You have to drag it out of life, kicking and screaming. And just when I thought I couldn't push anymore, something amazing happened. One of the small clients I'd worked with, a tiny company, referred me to a bigger one. And that bigger one referred me to another. And suddenly, after months of scraping, failing, crying, and laughing, momentum started to build. But here's a truth no one tells you about climbing back from the bottom. The higher you rise, the louder the ghosts of your past will shout. The wife who called you a failure, the friends who doubted you, the fear you carry inside that maybe, just maybe, you'll fall again. I heard all of them, every single night, and I promised myself one thing. If I ever got back up, I wouldn't just survive, I'd create something unstoppable. And that's when I started noticing her company, the one my ex-wife had built after leaving me. Small, struggling, but still in the same industry I was conquering. Funny, isn't it? We were both chasing the same dream. But my hunger had sharpened in ways hers hadn't. I didn't plot revenge. Not yet. I was too busy fighting for my life, building something that couldn't be ignored. But fate has a funny way of setting up the stage for its own drama, and so I kept going. One day at a time, one contract at a time, one victory, no matter how small, at a time. By the end of 3 years, the company I'd built wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And the industry that once dismissed me was starting to notice. And that's when I saw the opportunity that would change everything. The moment that would flip the script on everyone who ever called me a failure. After years of struggling, something incredible started to happen. The contracts I fought for, the clients I nearly begged for, the late nights I spent crying into my coffee, they began paying off. Not just in money, although that helped, believe me, but in recognition. People started noticing my work. Meetings went from awkward pitches to eager invitations. Investors who had ignored me before were now calling back, and suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. It's funny how quickly the world changes its mind when you start winning. Those same people who told me I'd never make it now wanted a piece of whatever it was I had built, and then came the breakthrough. A major client, one I'd only dreamed of, signed on. And with that, my company's reputation shifted overnight. I went from the guy nobody cares about to the one to watch. But the real twist, the one I hadn't planned, was noticing her. Her company. The one my ex-wife had built after leaving me. It was struggling. Smaller than mine, but still in the same industry. And suddenly, the reality hit me. We were in the same arena, not by choice, but by fate. Now I could have ignored it. I could have congratulated her silently and kept climbing. But something in me, that old, quiet fire that had fueled those sleepless nights, it whispered, opportunity. I didn't want revenge, at least not in the petty sense. I just wanted proof. Proof that persistence, grit, and refusing to quit could outweigh talent alone. And so, I kept building. The company grew faster than I could have imagined. New hires, better offices, media coverage. People started recognizing my name. And through it all, I remembered those words my wife had said to me. You're a failure. I repeated them in my mind. Not as an insult anymore, but as motivation. Yeah, weird, right? Her words became fuel. Every deal I closed, every milestone we hit, I imagined telling her, not in anger, but with quiet satisfaction. And then, the moment came that changed everything. I was reviewing potential acquisition targets for my company. A routine task, numbers, spreadsheets, growth charts, until I saw it. Her company, struggling, vulnerable, and exactly in the industry I now dominated. I leaned back in my chair, heart racing. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who once told me I'd never make it was now sitting across from the man who might just buy her company. And that's when I realized the tables were about to turn. Not with vengeance, not with spite, but with life's beautiful, poetic justice. The day finally came. I walked into her office building feeling strange, not nervous, not angry, just focused, determined, and maybe a little amused by the irony. The receptionist barely recognized me, hadn't seen me in years. I asked for her. The moment I was led to the conference room, I saw her. She hadn't changed much. Sharp, confident, but something was off. Maybe it was the subtle stress lines. Maybe it was the realization that the world had shifted while she had stayed mostly the same. I introduced myself formally. Hi, I'm here regarding the potential acquisition. Her eyes widened slightly. Recognition. Surprise, maybe even fear. I could tell she hadn't expected me to be the one at the table. It's funny how life sets up these moments. One minute, you're the man nobody notices. The next, you're the one holding all the cards. We went over the numbers. Her company, small, struggling, but with potential. My company, thriving, unstoppable. And as we talked, I could feel the weight of those old words echoing in the room. You're a failure. Funny, isn't it? How silence can speak louder than any insult. I made the offer, clean, fair, but decisive. And as I handed the contract across the table, she looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. Not just me, but the man she had underestimated, dismissed, and labeled as nothing. She didn't say a word at first. I didn't either. We just sat there. Two people whose past had collided in the most unexpected way. And then, she signed. The papers went across the table. The acquisition was official. I leaned back, quietly satisfied. Not gloating, not revengeful, just peaceful. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or proving someone wrong. It's proving yourself right. It's building a life that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. Especially those who once told you you'd fail. I left the office that day feeling lighter than I had in years. A chapter had closed. A new one had begun. And the woman who once defined my failure was now part of my success story. And as I walked out of that building, I realized life doesn't always hand you justice on a silver platter. Sometimes you have to earn it, brick by brick, decision by decision, day by day. Looking back now, it all feels surreal. The man who once carried a box of his belongings out of an office, heartbroken and pride shattered, he's not the same man anymore. And here's the truth I want you to understand. Success isn't just about money or power or signing a contract that flips the tables on someone who doubted you. It's about reclaiming your life. It's about finding your worth, even when the world tells you you have none. I still remember the nights I cried over rejection emails, the meals I skipped, the friends I lost, the loneliness that felt heavier than any failure. But those moments, they built me. They shaped me. They taught me something crucial. You don't need everyone to believe in you, only yourself. And yes, seeing her company now under my guidance, it brought closure. Not revenge, not satisfaction from hurting her, but the quiet, powerful peace that comes from living your truth. I've learned to forgive myself, her, and the past, because holding on to bitterness only weighs you down. What matters is how you respond, how you rebuild, how you rise. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Being labeled a failure doesn't define you. Losing your job doesn't define you. Even betrayal, even heartbreak, they're just chapters. What defines you is what you do next. Trust me, if I can go from sitting in a dark apartment feeling worthless to walking into that boardroom and signing the papers, then you can rise too. So if you're watching this, maybe struggling, maybe doubting yourself, hold on, keep pushing. Build your dreams no matter how impossible they seem. And one day, you might just find yourself in a moment that feels like justice. Not because the world owed it to you, but because you earned it. And that's the story of how a man they called a failure built a life they couldn't ignore. And here we are, at the end of this story. A story that began with loss, heartbreak, and words I'll never forget. You're a failure. But it doesn't end there. Not really. Because life has a way of giving second chances, even when you feel like the world has already given up on you. I want you to think about the struggles in your own life, the moments when you felt small, powerless, or defeated, the people who doubted you, the setbacks that seemed impossible to overcome. Here's the truth. Those moments aren't the end. They're the spark. They're the reason you discover what you're truly capable of. Funny how the same people who once laughed at you end up being witnesses to your success, not because you sought revenge, but because you refused to quit. My story isn't just about being fired or heartbreak or even buying her company. It's about resilience. It's about turning pain into purpose. It's about finding strength in moments when you think you have none. So if you're struggling right now, remember this. Your past does not define you. Your failures are not the final chapter. What defines you is what you do when nobody's watching. It's how you pick yourself up, day after day, and keep building. And one day, when life throws you an opportunity, when you walk into that boardroom, that meeting, that moment of your life, you'll realize something powerful. You didn't just survive. You became unstoppable. Thank you for listening to my story. If it inspired you even a little, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that failure isn't forever. Because, in the end, the man they once called a failure, he's living proof that perseverance, courage, and belief in yourself can change everything.